Welcome to Devil in the Details, which is a panel about research in regard to your writing and how much research you should do and how it proves useful. And we have three writers here with us who are of strikingly different genres. And one of them is moving a chair. And so I'm going to allow everyone to introduce themselves.
Ooh, trick question.
Again, my name is Benji, Carr, and Vanessa.
You're starting that invitation.
You can do whatever you like. You can do whatever you like.
I'm Vanessa Riley. I have about 25 books in total. I write historical fiction, historical mystery, and historical romance. And we were just mentioning, so this year I had the paperback of last year's hardcover of Sister Mother Warrior came out in June. In July, my hardcover Queen of Exiles came out. This is historical fiction. This week, the paperback of Murder in Drury Lane comes out, and in October, the hardcover of Murder in Drury Lane comes out. So I'm doing about 2.5 books a year. Brand new books or releases in the other formats. Yeah, I'm nuts. So next!
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy to be sitting next to you. Maybe some of her prolific writing will rub off on me. I'll tell you, that's really cool. I'm Beverly Armento. I live here in Atlanta. And right now, I have one book for you. It's Seeing Eye Girl. It's a memoir. And, I've written all my life. I'm retired from the faculty at Georgia State University, where I taught forever and a day and loved every minute of it. So I was rather too busy to write then. And in retirement, I have kind of found my voice, and here we go. Working on more, but I don't know if I'm going to get up to 25. But that's really cool. Glad to be here.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Clemmons. I'm sort of the oddball out. I'm a historian, nonfiction writer. And so I'd love to do fiction. I don't know that I have that talent. Still, that blank page scares the hell out of me. I'd rather have lots of files and whittle down from that. But I've written two books, one on riches, the department store institution that was in Atlanta across the South, and another on Westview Cemetery. Those are better than Andean, so if you'd like something to honestly, I read both of those. I did a screenplay based on a Mary Hood novel, written with Mary Hood, and do some other writings, and now I'm currently working on a biography on Francis Newman, who was an avant-garde novelist in the 1920s who has been forgotten about, but was a bestseller in all of those.
Before we get started, I forgot that I was supposed to read this. Thank you for joining for the 8th Annual Broadleaf Writers Conference. Before we get started, we have some housekeeping announcements to assure that y'all have the best conference experience possible. Granted, most of these were just done outside anyway, so we're going to skip that and instead get into the conversation. What I love about this panel is the fact that we have three separate genres, three separate approaches, all of which involving research and authenticity, but all for different aims necessarily, potentially all for different ends. Vanessa, in regard to your writing, I know that you write Regency and historical romance, and
Historical fiction.
Historical fiction.
Mystery.
And historical fiction.
I got
historical
stuck.
mystery. No, you're
Regency.
No, you're cool.
Yeah.
It's just, well, I was reading an article in which they were referencing how one of your books was inspired not just by period pieces and not just by the period in which you were writing, but also First Wives Club.
Oh yes.
And so I was wondering, what is most necessary regarding research in order to be able to paint a time period, paint the scene, but also to, I think you mentioned having modern sensibilities reflect period pieces, like the way in which characters of that time period that you're writing about would inform the women of today or people of today?
Okay. Very, very good question. I'm going to take it a couple of different ways. Um, you have to know the period you're writing about. Um, it's sometimes difficult to find documents, but that's why we love nonfiction folks who lay it out for us. I'm a stickler for historical accuracy. Um, the problem that I've always faced is, you know, I'm a nerd's nerd, so y'all know nerds, but then there's the nerds nerd, right? I'm the one the nerds call for certain things. And so my mom, she's a historian. She stressed us doing a lot of literature, a lot of reading, and that, for anybody to be able to write well, you have to read a lot. And there was always a gap in the information, particularly when it came to people of color, black people within these time frames. When I started writing originally, people would curse at you and say that there were no black people at all. No, they didn't show up till 1865.
Oh, hell no!
I know, and so 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 the reality is to bring more of the truth forward. There was a point where 4 out of every $5 came from sugar, from enslavement, from indigo, cotton. That was more so than the moral reason why enslavement took so long to eradicate. Mm-hmm. It's a financial decision. Mm-hmm. When you're looking at these systems, when you're looking at these areas, trace the money. How are people making money from all strata? Not just the dukes and the higher upper echelons, but how does that layman make his money, the laywoman? How are they making their money? What are they spending their money on? What are their homes, their houses? So when I write, I'm taking all of that in, and I'm maybe showing you different pieces, but also giving you the things that we do know well. We know about the balls. We know about the courts and being presented to the queens and these sorts of things. You mesh all that together, so you give people the things that they're familiar with, but you also bring in these aspects that they've never seen before. And they have to trust you, because especially when you're talking about a time period that people have only seen, Georgette Heyer's version, of the Regency, or they've only seen that 1995 version of Pride and Prejudice, which is the best version.
It is the best version.
By don't give me that 2000 myth.
Bye, Kira.
Everybody needs their hair combed in that one.
Yep.
I digress. I'm digressing. But you have to bring the familiar, but with the truth. And so you have to do a lot of research. And you have to feel comfortable in telling these stories, because there's a little bit of a responsibility of me showing you these worlds to be able to bring that level of authenticity.
Beverly, the question that I wanted to ask you in regard to seeing iGirl was, with memoir, how exactly are you researching yourself?
That's a big question. And when I started, we all know a lot about ourselves, right? Well, wrong. There was so much I did not know. From, did my mother really marry my father? And if so, when and where? To where was I baptized? To what happened after the big fight? I want to give you some examples, because I spent a lot of time looking for answers to the big and the little questions. And all that research took a lot of time. Let me give you a prime example. When I was 5, there was a big fight at the house. My father, my mother, and my mother's lover. My dad had come in, and there you go. So, and a lot of the fight, I mean, it was brutal, was in my bedroom. You know,
Oh.
my baby, yeah, it was all around me. And so I knew I was 5. I knew my baby sister was at least a year. And I knew that the police came. And I knew it was pretty brutal. And they both, the men, you know, beat the hell out of each other. And then the police came. And that's the end of my memory. So here I am, umpteen years old, trying to bring it back in my mind. And a cousin of mine, we were in Yonkers, New York, said, you know, I think I heard someplace along the line that there was a newspaper article, there was a trial, a newspaper. Okay, so she and I go to the microfiche. Now we're talking about, my friends, 1945 to 47. It's within that time period. And if you've ever searched microfiche, you know it's a long, laborious process. Because first of all, I did not know when. I mean, I had that window, but that's a big window. That's a lot of newspaper. And you're looking for something you really don't know, except the key words. So, finally, I mean, we were in the library for many, many, many hours, 2 days in a row. At least, finally, I found 2 articles. And this one is entitled Court Lenient in Radsey Row with Husband. Radsey turns out eventually to be the stepfather. Okay, so I finally find these articles. Now, what does all that research yield in the book? Let me read you what all that time in research becomes. Okay. A trial jury found Ron Radsey guilty of third-degree assault. He was sentenced to a year in prison. The prison was suspended because of his World War II service. That's all I got. But I got it.
Yes.
Now I knew what had happened. And I knew from the newspaper articles that the judge chastised my mother right there in court. What is wrong with you? You know, you've got this good husband and here you do this. You know, that's kind of interesting. And I also learned that my real father, in an act that looked like generosity, said through his attorney to the judge, I think we need to look at Ron Radsey's World War II record, because he was like a war hero. Now, wasn't that benevolent of my father to do that for this lover? But in my maturity, what his real motive was I got to get away from her as fast as possible, let her have him, and I'm out of here, which is just what happened. So, he wanted him to be out of jail. And the judge said, I'm going to let you out of jail. We're going to suspend your 1-year sentence. If you stay, and you have to stay away from Mrs. Armento. Okay, so that's like one example of research.
Oh, yeah, that's a morsel.
There are tons of research that I had to do to find out about me.
Yes. Good Lord.
Yes.
All right. Jeff, as historian, I'm going to ask my question a little bit differently of you, because before I met you, and I've told you this, I wrote a story that was essentially a ghost story that I set partly at Riches, and I used a documentary that you made that also referenced your own book regarding riches before I met you. So thank you for helping me do research. And so in regard to collecting information for your books on Westview Cemetery and Riches, do you start with the physical documents? Do you go to memory? Like, do you go to your own memories of the locations?
It's all over the place. It depends, and every book's different. Every process is a little different. With Riches, everybody remembers history through rose-colored glass. Oh, college was fantastic. When you really stop and think about it, I didn't have any money. I was up all night. And you have that, and that's the problem when you do a corporate history or a history about institutions, is that people remember them often differently. Also, those institutions make mistakes and do not correct those mistakes. So like the Pink Pig, which is put out in an incorrect press release, and that stood for 40 years as truth. Also, there's a lot of MLK, first night in jail, was the events that happened to Riches ever in his life. And people have written Pulitzer Prize books, and those are not accurate. And so when you start to find information that counteracts the narrative, you have to deal with that. But back to your question, it just depends. So, with Westview, got access to the AJC, and I read through 135 years worth of newspapers. With Riches, I did the same thing. They started in 1867, and we were about 2005. So I did all the research on the newspapers, and you go to primary sources, you go to the history center, and you talk to people. People don't remember things correctly. Lonnie King was a good friend of mine. He was there with MLK, doing the sit-ins at Riches. He remembered things differently than the woman that was with them. So you have to deal with all of that as well. And then on the personal aspect, I have to filter things through her life narrative and all these. So
Yes.
I'm getting a little off topic, but
no, you're
it's
not.
all over the place.
You're really not.
Well, I mean, it's difficult. It's time consuming. For my Riches book, I had 1,200 type pages of notes that got whittled down to 224 page manuscript. So you have to leave a lot out as well. And then you get sidetracked. I don't know if you all knew, but I had this story I wanted to tell about this woman that was going to death with a cinder block. I had to put it in the book. I spent 2 weeks trying to fit it in, realized it wasn't going to work, and I had to make a footnote out of it. So, but it's all like
one of the things. Do you have something to? By all means, yes.
Just what you guys should take away is they both talked about newspapers. Newspapers are your godsend. They tell you, but you also have to remember every writer has an agenda. And how they write things sometimes are salacious. And it's got to make sense to your story, but you're getting the bones for your story. For my time period from 1750 to 1830s, the British newspaper archives are a godsend. I actually subscribe to that. You can query it, and sometimes you've got to play with the querying, but you'll find these beautiful vignettes, like that cinder block story, like this court case, that as a writer, that's something that you can work with. You have the bounds of the facts, but you get to bring the emotions, how you want to play that, how you want to illustrate that returned memory of this 5-year-old, if this 5-year-old's telling a story. You get all these different choices, but it's this hardcore research that you need that are going to give you the bones. So that's all I wanted to say, because these are really good.
By all means, everyone is encouraged to talk to one another. It makes the conversation more colorful, and again, everyone is here for you, not me.
Can I add one thing?
Of course.
To that point with newspapers, what I've found is with the advent of the internet, people have taken information from newspaper articles that's not accurate, put those on the internet, and now they're passed as documents. So filter everything you do.
And another thing that is important, and you touched on this before, is when looking back at the research, newspapers are essentially the history of what happened in the moment. But again, pay attention to the identity culturally or otherwise, of who was writing a perspective at that time, and then if you are of a different outsider cultural identity, or in some way think that there's a part of the story that's not being told, just by the nature of what the expectation was at the time, then that will often flesh out your work. I'm a newspaper writer myself, and so as a result of that, I always have to remember who I am to a story, and that's something that you as writers should ask anyway, which is, why is this story mine to tell? And Beverly, that's very clearly illustrated in yours. It is your own personal history. But in regard to the genres that you tackle, I love how your identity factors into the cast of characters and the detail and that history.
Benji, you've outed me. I'll have to admit it. I am a doctorate in mechanical engineering from Stanford University. I have several degrees from Stanford and Penn State University in engineering management, mechanical engineering, and that always comes across in everything I
write. And why not?
It does. Seriously, it does, because you always ask yourself how and why. I taught you to trace the money, right? How does a person go to work? Why are they going to work? Why do you center a story in this particular area? For Queen of Exiles, the modern conventions, for one, every writer has an agenda. My agenda is to return to you every power woman I can find in history. Anyone who's done something really cool and fabulous, but we know her husband. All right? If they mention the husband. Nothing wrong with the men in the room, sorry. Y'all need to tell your stories too. Okay? But there are women who've done some really incredible things, and I'm a first sources girl. Can you find interviews? Can you find their personal letters? When I was looking to do Queen Louise Marie Covidal, Christophe's story, I had translated French. This goes back to nerdhood. I translated. Thomas Mathieu wrote a history of the Revolution of Haiti in 1815. That's about 10 years past the revolution. He was actually able to interview Mary Claire, which was the first empress of Haiti. And he gives you these cool little vignettes about, Toussaint Louverture's painted buttons on his waistcoat. He talks about the bleach shortage, which, if you read Sister Mother Warrior, there's a point where Mary Claire wears all white and she's on a mule train. That's why you have a bleach shortage, okay? But you find all of this in the actual, closest source that you translate it. And I found this woman, Marie Louise, and at that point in the book, she's just a housewife. She's the wife of the second in command, Henri Christophe. Fast forward to modern day historians, you go to those Wikipedia pages and whatnot on the internet, and they'll talk about the sorrowful queen. Her name and the word sorrowful. When you go to the actual newspaper clippings, you find a resilient woman who helped her husband lead that nation, who in exile was recognized as a queen. She and her daughters, she recovers his fortune. Everywhere she went, she's probably the first media stock royal. When she goes to Austria, they're saying what date she's going, the newspaper's saying what date, what hotel she's staying on, if she's waiting on diplomatic papers. They say how many servants she's going with. They talk about the color of the servants. They talk about what she's wearing, and if there are men involved, which sometimes there were men involved, who she was visiting, who was visiting her, etc., etc. I found all the spa cities. She was on the European World Tour. The story gets so crazy. I actually included newspaper clippings. So y'all ain't gonna believe me, because present day convention says that she had to be poor because she was in exile, and because she was black, she had to be excluded. She's sitting with kings in a theater. I mean, they're sitting in order of precedence in Florence. And I add these newspaper clippings just so y'all will know I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
But also to go against this thing that we find sometimes of what we perceive history to be, or the lies that have been told so many times they're now true. Going back to primary sources, so if you can find people's letters, if you can find newspaper articles, and just absorb that is the best way to tell the story.
Thank you, Holly.
Yes.
I just wanted to add to that, be careful though from a historical perspective when reading first person narrative, because we remember things differently than they actually happen. We filter things through our own perspective. So a lot of times what someone may have put in a diary and all may not actually be what happened in the in that particular way. So just keep that in mind if you're doing stuff as well, to sort of balance all of that.
But you get the essence of who
You
they
do.
are.
Yes.
Right.
And
So,
the voice.
you know, you get their voice, absolutely.
Yes.
There is a, King Henri, he goes mad, unfortunately, as most kings do. And he's portrayed in history as this really brutal man. I found this beautiful letter of him writing to his son, and he and the son is a teenage boy. They've been having issues. They're talking about these grapes that are growing in the garden. The king took time to have a letter written, sent to his son, talking about the beauty of the grapes that are growing in the garden. It just shows another side of this man that you wouldn't normally get if you just look at the. So I love it anytime you can find their actual writings. But true, they lie about now. People lie in their diaries. You gotta know that they lie in their diaries, they lie in the letters. But at least you know the style of their lies.
Right. You know, I love this idea of the correspondence and the voices of the characters. For me too, finding old letters were just treasures. Just treasures. My mother's artwork, treasures. Because we had an awful lot into the portraits she was drawing, and she was drawing those when she was just about blind. So I mean, that's all. You bring all of that to the samples, but the letters tell you provocative things that you never had a clue about before. And for me, so much of the data has come late in my life, because that whole Italian side of me was sort of destroyed when the family fell apart. And I find out now I've got hundreds of cousins, and they're all over the New York City area. And they've got stories because their parents have stories. And, tracking down, when I started writing this, there were still a few of my mother's contemporaries living, and I was able to find a few of those. So one-on-one discussions.
Oh, I actually have questions for you in regard to that.
Yeah.
It's going to lead into what I was going to ask you. Because I know that a lot of people here, broadly, if they're writing family narratives or if they're writing a memoir based upon their own personal experience or even fictionalized version of like their own memories, some people are afraid to put that out there while their families are still alive or something of that sort. How did you avoid that trepidation?
Well, that is, everybody says that, and I said it. And then I said, if you wait for them all to die, you'll probably be right there too. So, what's a girl to do but write it? And it just so happened that the main characters were all deceased. But of course I've got siblings and cousins, and I call them by their real names. And all of my teachers I call by their real names. And part of this story is how important the adult mentors were in my life. But, I made sure that if there was a story about a living person, that person read those sections, and whether I changed the name or not.
Right.
But then, in terms of the main character, my mother, even though she is long gone, the most important thing for me was that I portrayed her in a balanced way, as we'll be discussing later this afternoon, that I didn't demonize her, and that I remember that all of us are complex, multidimensional characters, and that was my job, to find my voice so that I could achieve that in the written word. It took a while to find that, and my sister will say to me, "How come you were so nice to Mama?" Well, it wasn't that I was like so nice. That was her too. She was that too, as well as the other things. So look at the whole picture of your characters.
Yes.
And all of us are writing about, real life institutions or real life characters or deceased characters, and they're not linear. Everyone's complex.
And that adds to the richness of it. But additionally, like, the stories that you are writing are important, and particularly, even I would say, stories of pain or things that someone else might be able to connect to. You're speaking for someone who you're speaking to someone who needs to hear it, even if you don't know who they are. So I'm advising that, like, as you all did, do not hold yourselves back. Do not be intimidated. Make the mistakes, fall into them, and you will learn.
I just wanted to add a
Of course.
footnote to that, Benji. I must admit that when the book was ready to be launched, I had a macro meltdown. I had a real panic attack. I thought, what the hey have I done? Now everybody's reading, will read, strangers will read about all these personal things in my life, and most of them are not very pleasant. And I was just really frightened, and but it was kind of too late. But I'll tell you, the reception has been wonderful, and this book has done just what you were saying, Benji. It gives people permission to own up to their own trauma. And, in today's world, mental health is a huge issue. And it's the book discussions always center around childhood trauma, childhood adverse experiences, how important teachers are, coaches, counselors. So those are the messages that I wanted to portray, and people see that when they read the book. And that's what we primarily talk about.
Jeff, in regard to landmarks, which is essentially like you are collecting everyone's narrative and putting it available for everyone in regard to memory, but so necessary. Like, how do you even start?
With that, but, you got to start somewhere. You start doing it. You just got to start diving in and start looking for things.
Right.
To your point, I reached out to Natalie Dupree and some others and asked them to read the section that I'd written on them to verify it. I was lucky Ronnie came to the lab and was able to talk to him and some others before they came, so they could talk about those narratives.
I asked where you got started, and you got started there. But okay, so then, in regard to your book about Westview Cemetery, how many people are no longer available to tell the story of the cemetery, or is it?
There's 125,000 people.
Right. No, but like
a lot of them are not around.
well, yes.
But I'd say I did a nuts and bolts kind of. So contrary is kind of an interesting dichotomy.
Go ahead.
You all were talking about voice. I tried very hard not to put a voice in my narrative, in the fact that I didn't want to have a political agenda. Now, that's all sounds good, but we all end up having an agenda at some point.
Right.
But I tried like really hard, even with the civil rights movement stuff. I tried very hard not to say one person was bad and the other person was good. I just tried to lay out the facts and let the readers decide what it is. So I do say it's very Wikipedian style. And Wikipedia is a great source to start with, and then go from there. But it's difficult. You just got to pick a place and start. And what you'll find is you start one place. What you're really going to find is you'll go down a bunch of rabbit holes, and you spend more time researching and having fun doing that than actually writing. So, and that's the danger of research, because then I get sidetracked and like, oh, that's cool, and that's really cool. Yeah.
Okay, so that leads to the next question. When do you know when to stop the research and when to put pen to paper? Like, when do you stop?
I wrote on Beverly. I had Beverly, my publisher.
That helps.
Which helped me. Now, I missed them on both books by 2 or 3 years. But they still made me, that's what helps me, keeps me going. Even my third book, I have a deadline. Because otherwise, I'll just keep going, I'll do that tomorrow.
Yeah, this is where the engineer kicks in.
Yeah.
Deadline? Okay, let's backwards calculate out. Let's put a reserve. So, like, we work all the way backwards of when I have to have that first draft done, when the second time they do. I don't miss deadlines. You know, it's a neurotic sense in thing. I cannot do that. Which, one time, when I mentioned, I read Thomas Matteo, that Tucson Louverture had painted buttons on his waistcoat. So his vest, the men in the military men. Well, as an engineer, would be like, well, what was on those buttons? How were they painted? What kind of material? How did they clean them? We know about the bleach shortage. The bleach would take it out. So you go on this. I would spend 3 or 4 weeks on this for one sentence in the book.
Oh yeah.
And trust me, I don't even think I told you it was birds. It was birds. I now have 2 rules. If I find something interesting when I'm researching, you better kinko it. You better get the URL. You do screenshot. You will never find it again.
Yeah.
Okay? Never. I don't care what you're talking about. Just stop. But give yourself 2 weeks. If I cannot find what I'm looking for within 2 weeks, I know y'all can. I know the regular reader won't be able to trust me. When I tell you, this is the engineer nerd kicks in. I love databases. I do mine them. I'm a JSTAR girl. I go through all these various resources. I cannot find it. It cannot be found.
Yeah.
And you had to get there because you at times you just have to use your period knowledge to make an assumption. So if you're looking for style of dress, you can look at portraits. There's ways you can get the answer as opposed to that specific answer for that particular area, et cetera, et cetera. You can look at other Caribbean islands. There are ways of getting close to the answer so that you're within the approximation. But you have to be good with saying, I can walk away. Because you will sit here and you'll miss your deadlines, you will miss everything, and you'll have a great time in this hole that you fall into. And then you'll feel bad when it's one sentence in your entire thing.
By the way, there is a lesson and a compliment in the fact that the person who said that she never missed deadlines is also the person who has the most books.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Yes. Did I just stop the conversation cold? I did not mean to.
Yeah.
Look, while we're on that,
Yes.
all you writers out here, it is very easy to get distracted on every, think about life as guns and butters, right? You can have so much guns, so much butter. So every moment that I'm not writing, I'm not spending it with family members. So everything has a priority. But if you keep not writing, you're telling your body, you're telling your mind, you're telling your friends, everybody that's not important. And it gets harder to go back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those nuts that says you got to write 100 words a day. If
That's
you write
great.
100 words a day, you will have a 60 to 75 to 80,000 word manuscript by the end of the year, which is a full book in most places. 100 words a day. You're training. It's a memory,
Right.
muscle memory. 100 words a day.
Right.
Not right.
Go on. No.
That's where I would be different. And I know a lot of writers, you totally lie. You got to write a certain amount a day. Personally, I think you'll write what comes to you. But I do a lot of research up front, and then I sit down. So I did 2.5 years of research and wrote the book in 6 months, or 6 weeks, sorry, to do all that. So I personally am like, whatever it takes to do it. I've spent 2 months trying to write one freaking paragraph, and then wrote 2 chapters in one night. So it is a little like everybody has
Right.
their own thing that works for them.
Well, and that also works in terms of the priority of what you were writing. You were writing a history, thus it's vastly important to get the facts right.
Because
It is
people
still-
like me are gonna use your
yes.
history to write.
Yes, it is still necessary for it is still necessary for you to get the facts right. But also, what you're doing is you're creating scenes, and in creating scenes, then you want to pay attention to like at one point I asked a writer how heavy is the dress that the character is wearing when she walks into the room? What does the candlelight do to the way that she can look across the room? You have to pay attention to the body and the feel and how the details, like the way that we just go about in our lives today. Like, what are some of the interesting illustrative details that you found there?
My goodness.
Did you ever have to actually wear a corset yourself to see how one felt to describe it?
I have worn corsets, and it's very uncomfortable. I don't understand, why, but I get it. You have to, like, the way candlelight will appear on taffeta is different than it will look on silk. It'll be different. The shadows that you get from like the big bookcases with fretwork. I love architecture, and to me, the scenery is another character in the book. And it sets up so much. I mean, if it's supposed to be intrigue or tension, I'm also what they call a talisman writer. If I ever mention anything once, I'm never going to mention anything once. I'm going to bring it back because we're going to round it. Because I don't want you to have to pay attention to something that's not important. So everybody's read these books, and it's like all these details, and you get overwhelmed. And you forget the pacing of the story.
Right.
It's got to work in balance. So it's like if I spotlight something, it's got to be important why I'm spotlighting. So if I'm setting up, like if I'm just casually, talking about how somebody's desk is laid out, there's a reason. I'm either showing you what kind of person he is. Then maybe if it's one of my murder mysteries, there may be a murder weapon on the table. There are reasons you do this. But you cannot get... There's a balance, and you have to find the right balance. And it's also what type of story you're telling. If you're writing nonfiction, like I love all the details in there because something in there is going to fire on it. I'm going to lace it in. Like if I know how Rich's department store, the front glass, I'm a glass girl. If I know how they do some of the display models, or if there's even a famous, I'm going to see if I can weave that into the story just so that I can sit you there because I want to give you that moment. But you don't want to do that moment over and over and over again because you're taking away from the story you're trying to tell. So it's a balance that you have to weave. But there's a difference. And I have a box of cured fabric at home, and so sometimes I'll take candles and just see how it changes, and the way the light will change and shimmer on it. So when you think about these waltzes and these dances and these walking across the room, it's important.
You're talking about balance and what you're talking about writing and stuff. One of the advice I always tell other writers, and one that I live by, everybody's familiar with Dorothy Parker, the great list Algonquin, thank you. So she had she always said the art of writing is about climbing the ass of a chair. And it is so true. It is a lonely profession. There are going to be days when you won't be doing anything but writing, but you have to do it. You have to just force yourself sometimes to sit. Some people will say, too, if you're struggling to get up and go do something, a great writer, a friend of mine told me that when you force yourself to sit and work through it, because then the clarity will come in that struggle. But it works different for everyone.
Beverly, in regard to when you were writing your book, did you ever find a difference in time between historical truth and emotional truth in regard to writing your own narrative? Because again, the way we remember things affect us, and then I don't know that you need me to illustrate it. But.
Yeah, writing about your own life, especially if it's tumultuous, of course, is going to be the whole experience is shrouded in emotion. Um, that's why you remember the events because they're stored, with an emotional component. But for me, having time and space on my side and looking back gave me, I hope something comes with maturity, maybe a little wisdom, who knows. But I was able to try to look at the people and the players in my life with a more mature perspective. If I'd written this when I was 40, it would have been a very different book. But, there's emotion. And I think sometimes memoirs come from too much emotion. And, I don't know, they're kind of, I'm not saying the person shouldn't have written it, but a few years helps.
I have questions, certainly, but I also know that many of you do. Are there any questions that any of you would like to ask? Please let the first person be someone. I guess no one has questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No.
Okay. Unfortunately, or fortunately, there have been a number of books on enslavement, and this is an important story. It's something that we cannot forget. It's got generational trauma involved. Even the disparities in income and wealth are all can be traced back to enslavement. I write about, in my historical romances, I write about Baton and what they don't necessarily tell you about is that many of these duchies have plantations or habitations in the Caribbean. And when Jane Austen often writes, I believe it's particularly in Mantua Park, about one of the uncles having to go fix some things, and it says the habitation is not producing the amount of money he needs because this is how he's funding his lifestyle. There has been a movement for a while to make sure that the most painful, most brutal, most horrific stories are the ones that get printed and told. And so you have now a number of young people who don't want to learn history because they think of nothing but the enslavement story and the pain that that brings. And there's so many other stories. There are stories of inventors. There are stories, the pride of the African tribes. In System of the Warrior, I find Grantoya, who was a Dahomey warrior, who literally becomes enslaved, teaches Jean-Jacques Dessalines how to fight, how to move his troops in the hills. He's the man who is responsible for liberating slavery. He gets all his training from her. I found her an image in a comic book and did the research to figure out if this person is real and bringing these stories back. We need to look in our history. There are women and men who have done wonderful things, or they have survived and moved on and moved the race forward or moved our people forward. Those are stories we need to tell. Every story is important, but we need to open up our lens so we get all those stories.
And what you'll find from that is it's not black and white. It's gray. History is messy.
Mhm.
There's lots of messy. Do research on riches and civil rights movement. You would think everybody would fall on either two camps. But what you find out is, and then you get different strata. You get it seems like every persecuted group has persecution within its own group. So you have, riches, you would hear stories about the light-skinned blacks being treated better than the dark-skinned blacks. But that's something you don't really hear about in history. It's all just white and black. But how those different groups within that group reacted. So when the segregation or the sit-ins were going on, you had the wealthy black people hired riches to deliver stuff in unlocked cars, unlocked trucks in their houses, so people wouldn't know that it was coming from riches, because the rest of the public front was, boycotting, and it's money. I always say racism is based on the haves and have-nots. Historically speaking, in this country, it's been the whites that have had, and blacks or other have not. And I think you'll find it when you go through history that it gets messy and complicated. In Westview, I have the Confederate statues up out there. I actually work with kids. I was told open up and slaughtered by people, because I hate having to talk about the Confederacy. Because you can't live in Atlanta and tell history of Atlanta without talking about the Civil War. But what's interesting is on my tour, I do tours out there as well. I come around, and one of the last things I talk about is a Confederate flag. Where you look closely at the stone, it's a black gentleman who, what history we would read in, but believed in the Confederacy in the South and was in the musical corps, and also on his tombstone, he wanted a Confederate flag and his praise called. So it gets messy, I guess what I'm trying to say. And you will find out there are all these different strata and different stories. I just had to tell them.
And the more messy, the better the
Yeah.
You look for the juice. That's the book, right? I'm telling you right now. That's usually the messiest ones are the ones that haven't been told. Those are opportunities.
And I think that.
And part of what, coming up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, of course, I was in the middle of segregated schools and social equal rights issues, and so that's all context, and there are lots of examples all the way through of what life looks like from a kid's perspective and a young adult's perspective.
We have 5 minutes left. I wanted to go further in regard to one of the things that you said. It doesn't necessarily deal with research, but it does deal with current fiction and current storytelling. And both of you I know can address this. Is it possible to tell narratives that acknowledge trauma without re-traumatizing audiences?
Yes, it's difficult. And that's why you now see this advent of trigger warnings, because the messiness of life, the craziness of life, the darker side of life, sometimes those will become part of the narrative. But if the kick my dog syndrome, okay? I had a friend who was writing a book, and the main character had multiple affairs, killed like 8-9 people, burnt down some church, and kicked a dog. You don't need to do all that to show this man's evil.
Yeah.
You could just choose one or two. So it's like choosing the levels of trauma, because like you, in that particular example, you traumatized everybody, including pet owners. You can leave the pet owners out, and he's still a bad guy.
Yeah.
So it's picking and choosing the story you wish to tell.
I bet multiple guys dogs and murder.
And then
Yeah, I think your point is part of the strategy that I try to use, and that is to underwrite the trauma. And even though I think I did a pretty good job of toning everything down, there are still people, quite a few actually, who have trouble reading the book, especially if their lives resonate with mine. But in the long haul, everyone I've met who said that to me has also finished the book and felt like they they made a journey toward a successful ending, and that's gratifying too. But it's hard.
Yes, but necessary.
Very nice.
I think so.
Yes. Does anyone else have any other question that they would like to ask this panel? Because and for those of you who do not know, the same panelists will be here with me later this afternoon. So by all means, if you have questions, and also you can talk to them during lunch, talk throughout the day. I always ask this in my interviews, is there anything that I did not ask about that you wanted me to address?
Those are great questions.
Oh, thank you. Again, everyone's books are available outside. I'll read the thing. Okay. Our official bookseller for the conference is Brave and Kind Books. Select titles from our authors and recommended titles on writing, such as the best writing guide that I have ever read, which is Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, is available outside. And our guest authors will be glad to sign copies, I believe. You can ask them. And please do this during breaks and not during sessions, unless somebody wants to come up and grab these. Thank you all so much. I hope that I balanced out the questions so that everyone feels as though they had time. And I look forward to talking to you again this afternoon. And thank you all so much.